Move, now! The order cracked through the air as Commander Rivan Alvek pushed forward, his boots slamming against the dry earth as his soldiers scattered to the left and right. The Zorak warship hovered above like a specter, cloaking the field below in a shadowed veil. On this world, this insignificant world, no one could escape the weight of the Dominion. The ground vibrated underfoot, the air thick with the heat of re-entry and the pungent scent of a land unknown to the Zorak. Commander Alvek's armored frame glinted in the harsh sunlight as he adjusted the helmet on his head, watching the horizon through a slit in his visor. All units, prepare for immediate contact. This world falls today. As if on cue, the first human resistance emerged. Is that them? Jorik Mavlin, the Zorak's second-in-command, hissed from the side, his voice carrying just the hint of an unsettling calm. From the safety of a Zorak scouting position, the humans were nothing but shadows moving across the land, their guns slung over their shoulders, their eyes never still. "They're close," Rivan replied, narrowing his gaze as he watched the first few humans break from the cover of the nearby structures. "We've been expecting you." The words carried with them a quiet confidence, spoken by a human who had dared step forward. General Taro Vera stood at the forefront of the gathering force, tall and unyielding, his expression hardened like the steel of a battle-worn blade. Behind him, soldiers shuffled into formation, weapons at the ready, their eyes full of resolve. "This planet will fall like all others," Rivan stated, his voice deep and full of authority. He was used to this, the fear in the eyes of lesser species, the trembling voices that begged for mercy. But there was something different here. Something about Taro's unwavering gaze made him pause, just for a fraction of a second. Taro didn't flinch. "If you think this will be easy, Commander, you're mistaken." His tone wasn't a challenge. It was a statement of fact, steady and unshakable. Before Rivan could respond, the human forces moved swiftly, almost imperceptibly so. Earth's terrain was rough, broken, and uneven, unlike the flat battlefields of other worlds the Zorak had trampled. "Prepare for engagement!" Rivan barked as the humans spread out with unnatural precision. The air between them crackled as the first shots fired. The humans weren't using advanced technology. They weren't even using the most sophisticated weapons at their disposal. But there was something different about them. They fought with the unyielding ferocity of animals backed into a corner, each movement instinctual yet highly coordinated. Rivan's hand shot up. "Advance! Eliminate the resistance!" The Zorak troops moved swiftly, their heavy boots pounding against the Earth's surface with practiced intensity. The ground under them shifted as their war machines deployed, shaking the Earth like thunder. A Zorak battle unit, smooth, metallic, and imposing, swept across the battlefield, cutting a path through the scattered remnants of the human defenses. "Is this it?" Jorik growled, watching the humans try to regroup, their weapons flashing in a blinding sequence of fire. "This is not enough. They're not strong enough." Rivan didn't answer immediately. His eyes scanned the horizon, watching the humans fall back but never retreating too far. The fight wasn't over. It was just beginning. But it wasn't just the resistance that intrigued him. It was how the humans fought. They didn't wait for the Zorak to strike first. They met the assault head-on. With every gunshot, every calculated movement, they displayed an uncanny ability to adapt. There was no fear in their eyes, only determination. The battle raged on, each side exchanging fire, but something felt different about this world. It wasn't like the other worlds he had crushed beneath his boots. No, this one felt strange. Rivan narrowed his eyes as a soldier, slightly smaller than the others but moving with unnerving speed, darted forward, ducking behind cover just as a Zorak war machine fired. The soldiers' movements were fluid, instinctive, like they had been bred for this terrain. How were they able to maneuver with such precision? No other species he had encountered could think that fast. "I told you, Commander," Jorik said again, his voice simmering with frustration. "They know their land better than we thought. Their movements are too coordinated." "It's not the land," Rivan muttered, his eyes tracking the human soldiers' every move. "It's them. It's their adaptability, and we haven't even scratched the surface." For the first time in his long career, Rivan felt something he hadn't expected. A sliver of doubt. The battle continued, but there was no triumph in the air. The Zorak had the upper hand, yes, but the humans fought like the land itself was their ally. A sniper, hidden in a building just out of view, took down one of the Zorak officers, disrupting their advance. Earth's strategy was becoming clearer. It wasn't brute force they relied on, but something more dangerous. Improvisation. The humans weren't strong, not in the way that the Zorak were used to thinking of strength. But they were clever, resourceful. The Zorak had underestimated them. "We'll need to adapt," Rivan growled, grinding his teeth. "Our technology, our tactics, none of it is enough. We need something more." The engagement continued into the night, the Zorak and humans clashing with an intensity that shook the foundations of Earth itself. Despite their numerical advantage, the Zorak were forced to adjust their strategies constantly, each moment revealing something new about the human forces. Earth was unlike any other world they had conquered, and for the first time Rivan realized that this was not just another mission. The humans were not going to fall as easily as he had assumed. And that thought unsettled him in a way he hadn't expected. The Zorak may have ruled Deathworlds, but Earth was something else entirely. "Keep moving," Commander Rivan Alvek barked, his voice cutting through the chaos as he watched his soldiers struggle to maintain formation. The Zorak forces had pushed the human resistance back, but there was no victory in sight. His boots crunched against the gravel beneath him as the terrain shifted, the ground alive with the vibrations of distant explosions. The air was heavy, suffocating, thick with the strange mix of dust and Earth's odd, unfamiliar scent. It was not the smell of a battle, not the sharp tang of burnt metal, or the stench of dying creatures from other worlds. This was something different, something unsettling. Riven's sharp gaze swept across the battlefield, watching the remnants of human soldiers retreating behind the cover of dilapidated buildings and broken terrain. Yet they weren't fleeing in the usual fashion. There was no panic in their movements. They weren't running. They were regrouping, adapting. "They're too organized for this to be coincidence," Zorak Mavlin said, his voice low but with an edge of realization. He stood beside Rivan, a hand firmly gripping his weapon as his eyes scanned the shifting positions of the humans. Rivan clenched his jaw. "We'll find them." The Zorak commander looked back at his forces, struggling to move in the uneven environment. Earth's gravity was heavier than they had anticipated, and their war machines were slower, more cumbersome on the rough terrain. The humans, on the other hand, moved with an ease that sent a ripple of irritation through his mind. They were clearly outclassed in terms of technology, but the humans had an uncanny ability to use what they had to their advantage. "No more hesitation." Rivan snapped the command, turning to his strategist Talik Omir, who stood silently beside him, his sharp eyes flicking from soldier to soldier. "I want every inch of this area searched. We cannot let them regroup like this." Talik nodded and activated the heads-up display on his wrist, a series of light pulses flashing across the small screen. A map of the city appeared, showing the human positions, shifting, unpredictable. Rivan's mind raced as he analyzed their movements. Something wasn't right. The humans were too adaptable. The air crackled again, this time with more urgency. The distant sound of gunfire, the whir of Zorak battle machines, the thrum of energy shields, and the deep vibrations of their armored boots filled the silence around them, creating a dissonance that was as suffocating as it was unnerving. Earth's resistance had no place to hide, but they weren't backing down. Their tactics weren't as crude as they seemed at first glance. Rivan realized that their force wasn't centralized like other human armies he had encountered. Instead, they operated as if in individual pockets, cutting off each attempt at communication. Each small group was a moving cell, seemingly unaware of the others, but working together as a single unit. "What is this?" Rivan's voice dropped lower as the realization hit. He turned to Zorak, his gaze sharpening. "It's not just a battle. They're not simply fighting us. They're testing us, watching how we move." Zorak glanced toward the laser plasma displays, his expression tense. "They know how we fight. They've seen it before. This is something else." Riven clenched his fists, frustration growing. His mind raced, trying to understand the humans' tactics. "Their technology is outdated," he muttered. "They shouldn't be able to do this. We outclass them in every way." Talik's voice interrupted his thoughts. "Their strength is in their unpredictability, Commander. It's what we're up against." He pointed to the heads-up display, showing a complex array of human positions. "Look at this. They're outmaneuvering us at every turn. They've studied us. Their attacks are designed to get us to expose weaknesses." "Weaknesses?" Rivan scoffed, his voice tight with irritation. "We have no weaknesses." Talik raised an eyebrow. "That's what we thought about every other world we've conquered." His voice remained calm, measured, but his words struck like a blade. "The problem is, we're fighting an enemy that doesn't follow the rules we expect." Rivan was silent for a moment, allowing the words to sink in. He stared at the heads-up display, his mind struggling to form a coherent strategy. Every movement they made was being anticipated. The humans weren't simply responding. They were controlling the flow of the fight, pushing the Zorak into positions where they could be overwhelmed. Their actions were erratic, chaotic, but with a strange sort of purpose. "We need to outthink them," Rivan said finally, a harsh edge to his voice. "No more brute force. They're watching us, testing us. We'll break them with strategy." Zorak nodded. "We need to move quickly." The Zorak troops advanced cautiously, their movements tighter now, more calculated. The human resistance was still there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the slightest misstep. The closer they got to the center of the city, the more they realized how much the humans had adapted. Every corner, every building had been turned into a stronghold, each one rigged with traps that were impossible to predict. As the Zorak forces neared an old military facility, the sudden sound of an explosion echoed in the distance. "Ambush!" shouted one of Rivan's soldiers. There was no time to react as the ground shook, and a burst of light erupted from the abandoned buildings on the left. The Zorak soldiers scrambled, their armor absorbing the force of the blast. But the blast itself was not what concerned them. It was the fact that the humans had anticipated the strike. They had led the Zorak right into a trap. Riven's eyes widened, the realization dawning faster than he could react. They had known exactly where they would go next. "They're always one step ahead," he muttered under his breath. "They don't just fight, they think. And they think faster than we can." Talik's voice was cold. "We cannot win with brute force alone." His gaze flicked back to the plasma display where human forces began to regroup once again. They were scattering into new positions, getting ready for the next strike. "We need to understand their tactics, or we will lose." Rivan gritted his teeth. "And how do you propose we do that?" Talik's eyes flicked to the human lines, calculating. "We need to bait them, Commander. Draw them into a false sense of security. They'll expose their weaknesses, and that's when we strike. This is no longer just a war. It's a game of chess." Rivan didn't speak, his mind already working through the plan. The humans were testing them, probing their defenses, studying their movements. It was as if they were watching them, waiting for them to make a mistake. "Fine," Rivan said finally, his voice firm. "We play their game, but we control the rules." As his troops regrouped and prepared for the next move, Rivan's mind raced with the implications of the battle. The Zorak had always prided themselves on their overwhelming strength and unyielding tactics, but Earth was showing them something else, something far more dangerous. It was a lesson that Rivan had never expected to learn. It wasn't enough to be strong. On Earth, survival came from being unpredictable. "Get those units into position!" Commander Rivan Alvek shouted, his voice sharp as it cut through the rising tension. The Zorak forces had taken a step back to regroup after the ambush, their once unstoppable advance now stunted by the relentless unpredictability of Earth's defense. The dust from the explosion still hung in the air, thick and pungent, a reminder that their calculations had been wrong. The humans had forced them to rethink everything. Rivan clenched his fist, his armor shifting with the movement as he scanned the horizon. "We won't make the same mistake twice." Beside him, Talik Omir, the Zorak strategist, keyed in a series of commands on his wrist display, the flickering laser plasma screens reflecting off his cold expression. They're not running, Talek said, eyes narrowing. They're preparing for the next strike. The map displayed the human forces' positions. Fractured, scattered, but somehow always within striking distance. This isn't just resistance, Commander. They're luring us in. Riven's teeth ground together as he absorbed the information. And we'll give them what they want. We'll bait them into the open. His voice was steady, but beneath it lay the weight of uncertainty. Earth wasn't like any world he had faced. The humans' resilience was more than a matter of grit. It was their ability to adapt, to learn on the fly, to use every advantage the environment offered. "Set the trap," he ordered. As his soldiers adjusted their positions, Rivan watched the battlefield unfold through his heads-up display. Each movement from the humans was meticulously tracked, analyzed. Despite the Zorak's advanced technology, they couldn't escape the fact that they were being outwitted. "They're too smart for brute force," he muttered to himself, almost to no one at all. "We need a different approach." "Let them come," Talek said, his voice like the cold edge of a blade. He had been working the battlefield from every angle, his sharp mind calculating their every move. "We'll give them an opening, then we close in." He tapped a few commands into the plasma display, and a new wave of soldiers began to shift into place, carefully drawing the human forces into the zone of attack. It was a gamble. If the humans took the bait, they would be cornered. If they didn't, it could mean disaster. "Commander," Zorak Mavlin's voice broke through, his tone serious, "we've detected movement. Something's wrong." Riven turned, his gaze flicking to Zorak, who stood near a communication panel. "What do you mean?" "They're not following our pattern," Zorak said, his finger tracing a shifting line on his display. "They're pulling back." Riven felt a chill at the base of his spine. The humans were known for their unpredictability, but pulling back? Was this a trick? "Where are they going?" Talek's fingers danced over the controls, his eyes scanning the shifting patterns. "They're retreating to a secondary stronghold." He paused. "And they're taking the long way around. They're circling." "Of course they are," Riven muttered under his breath. "They're not as naive as we thought." They had underestimated Earth before, and now the humans were showing them just how well they could think. This wasn't a retreat. It was a strategic withdrawal, a way to bait the Zorak into an even worse position. "They're setting us up," Riven said, realizing just how close they had come to walking directly into another trap. "Move the troops back, adjust the formation." But it was already too late. Before he could issue another command, an explosion rocked the battlefield, deafening in its intensity. Riven barely had time to react as his soldiers scrambled to avoid the blast radius, the air shimmering with heat and dust. The earth beneath their feet trembled violently, throwing soldiers off balance. A Zorak war machine, caught in the blast, was sent tumbling, its massive frame crumpling as the explosion sent shockwaves through the terrain. The sudden shift in momentum was jarring, the sky above now blotted out by the clouds of dust and debris swirling in the chaos. "They've adapted faster than we expected," Zorak muttered, his voice strained as he surveyed the damage. "This isn't the fight we anticipated." Riven's mind raced, his eyes flicking over the battlefield as his troops tried to regain control. "We're being outclassed at every turn," he said, almost to himself. The humans weren't just adapting, they were dictating the terms of the engagement, forcing the Zorak into a reactive position. The ground was their domain, and they knew it. "No more guessing," Rivan snapped, shaking off his frustration. "We need to take the initiative." The battlefield was a maze now, a series of scattered structures and broken ground. Humans moved in tight, organized groups, exploiting every nook and cranny as they executed hit-and-run tactics with surgical precision. "Where are they getting this from?" Riven's voice rose with disbelief. "How are they always 2 steps ahead?" Talek, calm as ever, gestured to the plasma display. "They're not afraid of us, Commander." His eyes were cool, calculating. "They don't care about strength, they care about survival, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to make that happen." The words hung in the air like a warning. Riven understood the meaning, but hearing it so plainly made it more real than he cared to admit. The humans had no pride to protect. They fought because they had no other choice. and that made them far more dangerous than he had first imagined. "Fine," Riven said, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "We adapt too." He turned to Talik, his eyes steely. "We need to find their weak spot. There's always one." Talik didn't hesitate. "We'll lure them in. Let's see how they respond." The next phase of the battle began, this time with a more deliberate approach. The Zorak forces moved with renewed purpose, shifting to higher ground, trying to anticipate the humans' next move. But the humans weren't predictable. They didn't play by the rules. Their movements were erratic, seemingly random at times, but always with purpose. It was as if they were testing the Zorak, waiting for them to make a mistake. "This is madness," Zorak muttered, his voice strained as the battle continued. "They're not fighting to win. They're fighting to survive." "And that's exactly what makes them dangerous," Riven replied grimly. "We'll make them pay for underestimating us. It's not just strength that wins wars. It's adaptability, and I'll be damned if we lose to them on that." The human forces, though smaller in number, had the advantage of flexibility, of knowing the terrain better than the Zorak ever could. Riven's soldiers pushed forward, but every step was met with resistance, each move calculated and purposeful. The humans, it seemed, were not about to fall into the trap the Zorak had set for them. "They're drawing us into their world," Riven muttered, his gaze narrowing as he watched a group of human soldiers disappear behind the ruins of a nearby building. "And they're doing it with precision." But there was no time for hesitation. The Zorak were too far into the fight to back down. Rivan adjusted his armor, his resolve hardening. "We'll finish this. They may be unpredictable, but we're Zorak. We'll force them to bend." As the battlefield raged around him, Rivan Alvek knew that Earth wasn't going to be easily conquered. But he was determined to make the humans pay for their defiance. "Advance now!" Commander Rivan Alvek snapped, his voice cutting through the frantic movements of his soldiers as the ground trembled beneath their boots. The Zorak forces, now fully on the move, surged forward, pushing toward the heart of the human defenses. It was time for the decisive blow. "They've learned our moves, but it ends today. We'll bury them beneath their own mistakes." The air around them was thick, heavy with dust kicked up by the rumbling march of war machines. Despite their technological superiority, Rivan felt the slow burn of frustration deep in his chest. The humans weren't giving up. In fact, they were adapting in ways he hadn't expected. He could hear the distant crackle of gunfire, feel the slight vibration of explosives underfoot, and the hot wind biting at his skin as it whipped through the ruined buildings ahead. "Deploy the front line," Rivan commanded, his teeth clenched. His troops scattered, weapons raised, moving with purpose. The Zorak war machines, though massive and formidable, felt sluggish in this unfamiliar environment. Their sensors picked up traces of human movement, but the humans were too unpredictable to pin down. "They know the ground better than we do," Rivan muttered. "Keep the pressure on them. Force them into submission." The Zorak were skilled in siege warfare, brutal, efficient, overwhelming. But these humans, they weren't just fighting for survival. They were actively manipulating the battlefield. Riven's gaze darted to his plasma display, a flickering grid of red and blue dots marking every shift in the battle. Humans moved in scattered groups, no clear formation, as if they were always one step ahead, always adjusting. A sudden explosion erupted from the east, human artillery striking Zorak lines. "They're closer than we thought," Zorak Mavlin, Riven's second-in-command, shouted over the comms. "They've set up ambushes. We need to adjust quickly." The Zorak were being herded into a narrow space, their immense machines trapped in a valley of rubble. The humans weren't simply attacking, they were outflanking, cutting off avenues of retreat. This wasn't a straight-up fight. It was a battle of attrition, a war of positions. "We're being funneled," Riven gritted his teeth, his mind racing. "Talik, bring up the reserves. This isn't going to be a walk in the park." Talik, ever calm, didn't hesitate. "Understood." Moving reinforcements into position. His fingers danced over the controls of his wrist display, adjusting the deployment strategy. "We need to draw them out, force them into the open, where their numbers won't matter." Riven stared ahead at the advancing human forces, who, despite their lower numbers, were pushing forward with remarkable tenacity. "Their tactics are frustratingly effective," Rivan said, more to himself than anyone. "This world isn't just different, it's redefining everything we've learned." But Rivan wasn't about to back down. He wasn't the leader of the Zorak Dominion for nothing. He had seen Deathworlds far more hostile than Earth, and he knew how to crush any resistance. The key was patience and understanding how the humans thought. He had underestimated them at first, but no longer. "Zorak," Rivan said, his voice cold, "set the diversion. Draw them out. We'll flank from the rear." Zorak's lips curved into a tight smile. "Already on it, Commander." As the human forces pressed forward, believing the Zorak were immobilized, they began to shift positions. This was their mistake. They thought they had the upper hand, but the Zorak were about to show them the true cost of overconfidence. Zorak's diversion sent explosions echoing across the far side of the battlefield, and as the humans turned to investigate, Riven's forces moved quickly, closing the gap from the rear. The trap was set. "Now," Rivan growled, voice steady but filled with cold fury. "Hit them hard, no mercy." The Zorak war machines, which had seemed clunky and slow moments ago, were now rolling forward with renewed purpose. The ground shook as their heavy feet collided with the earth, sending tremors through the battlefield. "Focus fire on their artillery," Rivan barked, watching his soldiers pour fire into the human defenses, their projectiles searing the air. The human lines buckled under the pressure, but they didn't crumble. Instead, they responded with a barrage of their own, rocket-propelled grenades streaking through the air, striking Zorak machines, causing a cascade of sparks and smoke. The humans had anticipated this. They knew exactly how to strike, where to strike, and when. "They're relentless," Zorak muttered, his voice tinged with disbelief. "How do they keep going?" Riven's eyes burned with a fury that had been long dormant. "Because they know what's at stake." His fists clenched tighter. "And so do we." The battle escalated quickly. Human soldiers, despite being outgunned, fought with remarkable effectiveness. They adapted on the fly, adjusting to the changing tides of the fight. Rivan watched as a group of human infantry emerged from a nearby building, their weapons raised in coordinated, silent bursts. Zorak soldiers fell, their armor punctured by the humans' makeshift weapons, sharp, aggressive, and brutally efficient. "Talik!" Rivan shouted over the roar of battle. "We need to change tactics. This isn't working. They've adapted too quickly." Talik's voice was calm but sharp. "Understood. Recalibrating our strategy. We'll push forward with a more focused approach. Take their command structure." Rivan nodded, his mind already turning the gears. Taking out the human command structure was the key to breaking their resolve. "Send in the reserves. No more hesitation. We strike where they least expect it." The Zorak advanced again, this time with renewed fury, the ground trembling beneath their feet. The atmosphere felt charged, electric with the weight of the moment. They had pushed the humans to the brink, but it wasn't enough to crush their spirit. This wasn't just a fight for survival, it was a test of will. The battle raged on, the tide slowly turning in the Zorak's favor. But Rivan knew it wasn't over. Earth was a strange, unpredictable planet, and its people, unlike any he had faced before, fought not because they had no choice, but because they had found something far more powerful than strength. They had found purpose. "We're not done yet," Rivan said to no one in particular. "Keep pushing. We can't afford to give them room to breathe." As the dust began to settle, the human forces were still there, tired, bloodied, but far from broken. They fought not just with weapons, but with an unrelenting spirit that refused to yield. Riven's mind spun, calculating, analyzing, searching for weaknesses in their defense. The human front lines were faltering, but they were far from finished. "This is not over," Rivan muttered. His gaze hardened as he looked out at the battlefield, where the Zorak had drawn first blood. "Not by a long shot." "We're losing ground," Zorak Mavlin shouted, his voice raw with urgency. His fingers flew over the laser plasma display, tracking the shifting movements of human forces. The human resistance had not only withstood their attack, they had somehow turned it against the Zorak. The battlefield, once dominated by the crushing weight of Zorak firepower, had become a brutal game of cat and mouse, and the humans were winning. "We're being outflanked," Talek Omir muttered, his expression cold, though his mind was working at a rapid pace. "We underestimated them. They're not just fighting, they're evolving in real time." His gaze swept over the battlefield, and Rivan could almost hear his thoughts turning, recalibrating their approach. But there was no time to reconsider now. The momentum was shifting, and Rivan knew it. "Move everything back! Set up a defensive perimeter!" Rivan barked, his command cutting through the tension like a blade. He scanned the chaos, the whir of weapons fire, the thunderous sounds of collapsing structures. Yet amidst the discord there was a strange, gnawing realization, something he hadn't expected when they first arrived. "It's not about firepower, is it?" Rivan muttered to himself, his voice barely audible as he watched the humans regroup in the distance. "They're not here to win. They're here to survive." As his forces retreated into a makeshift defensive position, Rivan stood staring at the human soldiers. "We can wipe them out," he thought, "but we'll never break them." The humans had no vast fleets, no towering war machines, no overwhelming power. They were fractured, ragtag, barely holding their ground against the Zorak onslaught. But they weren't backing down. They weren't surrendering. Rivan saw them, the ones still fighting, bloodied, exhausted, yet resolute, pulling their comrades back, patching wounds and preparing for the next attack. They were relentless, not in strength, but in sheer determination. The Zorak had underestimated their will to live. Talek's voice interrupted his thoughts. "We need to withdraw, Commander. We've pushed them as far as we can. This isn't a victory. It's a stalemate." Rivan's jaw tightened. "We can't. Not yet. There's still a chance." But deep down he knew that they had already reached the edge of what could be achieved. The battle was still fierce. The Zorak still had the advantage in numbers, but the humans had something else. A fire. A relentless will to adapt, to survive. It wasn't strength or technology. It was something deeper, something raw. He turned back to Talek. "We're pulling back, but not without making them pay for every inch." His eyes, however, betrayed him. He knew that Earth had already won. In the grand scheme of things, survival was victory, and humanity's survival instinct had proven stronger than their weapons. "Zorak, ready the evacuation." Rivan's voice was steady now, though his mind raced. "Tell the others, we're done here." As his forces began the withdrawal, the humans did not cheer their victory. There were no loud cries of triumph, no parades. They simply moved forward, slowly, methodically. Their soldiers patched their wounds, maintained their equipment, and braced for what would come next, and Rivan couldn't help but admire them for it. "General Taro Vera," Rivan spoke into his comm unit, his voice low, purposeful. "I'll leave your world intact for now. But mark this, you've proven something to us." On the other end there was a moment of silence, followed by Taro's calm reply. "I know." Rivan stood on the battlefield watching as the last of his soldiers retreated. The Zorak's dominance was absolute. But Earth? Earth had something no other planet had. "You've earned your place in the universe," he thought, "not by strength, but by what you are capable of." The human will had broken the Zorak's illusions. They had convinced themselves that their might could crush anything in their path, that their superior technology and strength could make them gods of the cosmos. But what they had failed to account for was the indomitable nature of humanity, the will to survive, to adapt, to learn and evolve. The Zorak had conquered countless worlds, but Earth? Earth was different. "You think you're invincible, Rivan," he whispered to himself, watching the humans dig in for the next round. "But you're wrong." His thoughts drifted back to the beginning of the invasion, to when Earth had first seemed like nothing more than a small, primitive world, a conquest to add to the Dominion's endless list. Now, it was a world that had humbled him. Earth was unpredictable, chaotic, but it was this very nature that made it so dangerous. The Zorak had been defeated not by force, but by the very essence of humanity, its ability to adapt. Rivan felt the weight of the truth pressing down on him. "Strength doesn't win wars," he murmured. "Survival does." and Earth has mastered that. Talek joined him, looking out over the battlefield where the last remnants of the Zorak forces were pulling back. The Zorak had been defeated, but not in the way they had expected. The humans had fought not for victory but for the right to exist. And that, Rivan realized, was something the Zorak could never truly understand. "We retreat," Rivan said, his voice steady but laced with an unsettling realization. "But we will not forget what we've learned here." Zorak, always the strategist, turned to Rivan. "Commander, are we giving up?" Rivan looked out over the battlefield, his gaze drawn to the humans who had turned the tide with nothing but willpower. "We're not giving up, Zorak. We're leaving, because sometimes survival is the only victory that matters." The Zorak Dominion had conquered Deathworlds, planets of unimaginable danger. They had battled fierce creatures, advanced civilizations, and hostile environments. But Earth had something different. The humans didn't fight for dominion, for conquest, for pride. They fought for survival, and that made them the most dangerous species the Zorak had ever encountered. "This world," Rivan said quietly, his eyes never leaving the humans in the distance, "is not meant to be conquered." He turned to face his retreating forces. "But it will endure." And with that, the Zorak withdrew, leaving Earth to stand on its own, not conquered, not subdued, but victorious in a way the Zorak would never fully comprehend. The humans had proven something the galaxy had never seen before. That true strength lies not in what you can destroy, but in what you can survive. The Zorak Dominion had met its match, and it had found that sometimes the greatest victory is the one you don't take.